It's great to have Raj Reddy here. Now, I was doing a Google search of all things, and I came across an interesting fact. In 2004, Gross Pulitzer and Wilczek won the Nobel Prize in Physics for the work on the strong force that binds quarks together. Now, I also discovered that Raj Reddy had nothing to do with that group, and he has never won the Nobel Prize in Physics, although he's won just about every prize in computer science that counts, including the most important one, the Turing Award, as well as the Okawa Prize, the Honda Prize, and the French Legion of Honor Award. Now, so why did I mention that stuff about the quarks? It's because I personally have this theory that Raj is the strong force that binds together the computer science community. And more than anybody else, I think he's the one who's tried to make computer science get out into the lives of people in the developing world and help them and help bring computing and communication technology to them. He's run the world's premier robotics lab for 2 decades, and the decade after that, he ran one of the world's premier computer science departments at CMU. I'm from Berkeley, so I have to say one of rather than the. He's the founder of the PCTVT project, which I'm sure he'll tell you about, and the Million Books project. And for the Millions Book Project, he was the first and I believe only person in the history of the world to get the presidents of India and China to write a letter and put their signature on the same letter to get them to agree to a project. So he is truly an irresistible force. And we're glad to have him on our side, and we're happy to welcome him to Google.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm not sure I need the microphone, but it's kind of noisy. I'll try to use it. So the talk today is not about emerging world or Million Books or a number of other things we could have talked about. But I came here with a mission. The mission I have is Google is not doing enough about organizing the information about the world. And there are lots of things you're leaving behind, and I want to tell you about them, and then hope that some of you, the younger generation, will actually pick them up and transform the way we access and use information. So this particular talk was inspired by my colleague Carbonell, Jaime Carbonell, who is the head of the Language Technology Institute, is one of the leading figures in language processing. For those of you who don't know ancient history, the first web crawler and Google and the search engine was built by one of the Jaime's students, Fuzzy Malden, called Lycos. The rest is history, as they say. And that was in 1994. And so one of the things that Jaime said was, when he was trying to explain to someone what is the purpose of the Language Technology Institute, what will it do, or what does it do, he said it is to provide the right information to the right people in the right time frame, in the right language, in the right level of granularity. And he had a few other rights, and which over the period of time we were jokingly used to call the Bill of Rights of the Information Society. Okay, so but when I kept thinking about it, and I would kind of bug him and saying, why aren't you doing all the research that needs to be done in this thing? He says, that's too big. You know, we don't have enough money to do all the things. Not even Google has all the money to do all the things. But but the important issue is when you look at the world's information with this prism and say, what does it mean in the first place? What research has to be done to get there? And will we ever get there? And if you do, how will we know whether we've succeeded or not? Right? So this is the challenge. And so I don't think I have the answer. I don't even think I'll be presenting all the facets of it. The purpose of my coming here and kind of giving this talk is to stimulate each of you and perhaps even have a dialogue. I don't think we can in this kind of forum, but we might have a dialogue afterwards. If you come to Carnegie Mellon, we will have which is right next door here, Carnegie Mellon West, in the NASA park. We can have a brainstorming session. So So that's the purpose of this talk. So here there are more than 5 here. The right information to the right people at the right time, in the right language, in the right level of detail, in the right medium. And the last one is an issue that's very important if you happen to be an illiterate person in a village. You don't know how to read or write, especially you don't know anything about English, and so you better have to be able to provide the information I'm looking for in my local language, but more importantly, using audio and video, not text. Okay? And so the right medium also becomes an important part of the research agenda that one needs to look at. Okay, so as soon as you use those words, they imply certain kinds of research, search engines, classification of information into the right chunks and right formats, and right time frame, anticipatory analysis, machine translation, summarization, speech input-output, all of these things, or video input-output too. And, but they're part of the solution, but not the entire solution. The right information just doesn't mean searching something and displaying a list of all the possibilities. It may be the right information without clutter, right? And the question of how do you kind of get only the right information, not everything else under the sun, perhaps, maybe one way of looking at it. And another way of saying it is, if you're a kid going to school, the right information to you is knowing about the things that were discussed in the class today. Or if you're about to get married, knowing the information about where to get all the relevant, wedding planners and all kinds of other things, solutions for that particular situation. So the right information has many contexts and many connotations to different people at different times. So the right is very difficult to define, I'm finding. And I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm just giving you examples of this. The right people, is again something that you can define. If you're about to be hit by a tsunami, you don't want to, it doesn't matter if you broadcast it to the whole country of, Thailand. Is the people on the shore that are, sunbathing or or fishing or something that are going to be impacted. They are the ones that need to get the information. And by the way, they don't have days or hours or something. And furthermore, it is a push technology, not a pull technology. So you have to be able to kind of figure out how do you get the information to them in ways that are not usually kind of where I go and type in, is there a tsunami coming? And then it tells you something about it. So there are lots of very complicated, complex issues that this set of rights that Jaime Carbonell proposed seem to raise, and we don't yet have, as a community, language processing techniques community, don't have a broad research agenda that covers the whole spectrum of these issues. That's the thesis of my talk, basically. So now what I'd like to do is kind of take you through quickly what we are doing at CMU, which is less than, as I was telling my colleagues, which is less than 5% of what we need to be doing. And that's rightfully so, because we don't have the resources to do everything that needs to be done. So, in search engines, the right information from the future search engines, how to go beyond the just relevance to query and popularity, I'll talk about a little bit more. Second issue is eliminating massive redundancy. And for example, if you say, type into Google web-based email, it should not result in links to various Yahoo sites promoting their email, not even non-Yahoo sites discussing just Yahoo email, but should just say link to Yahoo email, Gmail, MSN mail, and a comparison between them, perhaps. That's much more what we call relevance rather than massive redundancy into the thing. The second issue is harder to do, and we need to somehow organize the world's information in this way. What information is trusted, and what information is just pure marketing, and what information is snake oil. Unfortunately, the web publishing paradigm permits all of them to have equal weight. So we need to figure out how to begin to go towards trusted information sources. At one point, I proposed to my friend Bob Kahn, who is one of the inventors of the IP protocol and the internet, that maybe we should have a AAA web, authentic, archival, and always available information. So how do you make sure it's authentic? That means you have to register your information with some trusted society. Maybe Google could set up such a thing. You submit your information, you get a checksum or something, and then every time you access this information, if you have changed anything, it'll say, no, it's not authentic anymore, and but some other information. You're not getting the original information that is certified. So if anybody has changed it, including yourself, then it's no longer the original information that was certified or trusted. This is where the peer-reviewed journals they're different than web sources of information. And peer-reviewed journals are not cannot be changed. That is, they're printed and published, and they're reviewed, and somebody certifies that this is high-quality material, and then it's there forever in that form. They may be wrong or right, doesn't matter, it's there, right? So we don't have trusted sources of information at this point. So I'll talk about these three subjects: maximum marginal relevance, and novelty detection, and named entity extraction as three narrow topics within this right information, which is what we're doing. So most query systems kind of simply retrieve everything that's relevant to the keywords that you type, right? Sometimes that's not enough. Things like novelty, timeliness, appropriateness, validity, comprehensibility, density, medium, all kinds of things might be also appropriate, rather than just purely relevance to the thing. Novelty is non-redundancy, if you want to call it that. If there are 20 different hits or 100 hits that are more or less saying the same thing from different sources at different newspapers or different locations, you ought to be able to say, that's all one thing, but let me give you 5 things that are really different from each other, right? And that would be a desirable outcome for search engines. So, there's more detail here. I don't want to go into the detail, but I think you understand. So if you have large number of things in the central cluster there, and there are lots of outliers, you want to pick one out of each of those and present that, because then it'll be maximally non-redundant, if you will, right? And that's what you're looking for. So novelty detection is another idea, namely that's usually relevant in newspaper stories. Usually, one of the things that happens in newspapers is, out of the blue, a word Katrina appears. It was never there in the vocabulary before, and suddenly it takes on a meaning of its own. It goes on and on and on, for a few days or a few weeks is the top story, and then it slowly goes away, right? It hasn't gone away yet, but it will one of the days. So, so the detecting of a new event, turns out to be an important aspect of getting the right information available, in ways that's not otherwise. Then there's a whole set of issues about how you do that, cosine similarity, TF-IDF, and things like that are examples of how you might do this. And so there are issues on how you do the first story detection, FSD sometimes it's called. And then categorize these topics, these words into topics, and then see if these terms are maximally differentiating in the topics. And the second way of doing this is to use situated named entities like Sharon as a peacemaker. So link detection is once you have the first story, you've detected it, now you need to track it over a period of time. Why is this important? It turns out at any given point in time when you look at a story, like number of people that died in Katrina, on day 1 it might say 7 people. On day 17 it might say 3,000 people. And then it kind of maybe goes down or up, just like the World Trade Center. And the total number of people that actually died changes every day. So if you're trying to kind of find out a fact of how many people died in Katrina or World Trade Center disaster, you can't simply pick one of those things or present all of them. You need to find a way of summarizing or finding the final number. Sometimes it's called non-monotonic reasoning, right? Where what was true one day becomes not true the following day. And that becomes not true the next day. At some point it stabilizes and you know a fact, and at some point it disappears. You no longer have that fact, right? So this becomes an interesting set of issues. Another problem that occurs in language processing of this kind is named entity extraction. And this is important for the usual query type systems. Who was mentioned? For example, Peter was talking about Okawa Prize or Honda Prize. When I got it, I didn't know what this prize was. I got a letter saying you've been selected. I said, what is this prize? I never heard this before. But it turns out to be a very important prize in Japan. But here in USA, we never hear about it as much. But so the finding these things like who's mentioned, what locations, what companies, what products, turns out to be an important aspect of finding the right information. Okay? So here is a story, and what you're trying to do is named entity identification, and there are a lot of names, and there are a lot of roles they're playing, and the issue is, can we have a system which identifies different named entities and the relationships to each of them between what it is that they're doing and how they're doing it. And so if you can, there are many techniques for doing it. Finite state transducers and statistical learning techniques are two of the many. So here are the people that were mentioned in that story: Clinton, Cantor, Peng, Suzuki, Langford, and so on, and places. How did you know these were people, and how did you know these were places? And it turns out it's not a big deal. Once you have this thing categorized in your knowledge base, and with appropriate labels, you can do this. But you don't always have all the relevant information. You may come across a name that you've never seen before, or a name of a place that you've never seen before. And it's not uncommon for many of us, when presented with a foreign name, to know whether it's a man or a woman. And many times we make the mistake of calling he or she when it's the opposite is actually true. So, so the roles that they play turns out to be important also. You wanted to say, who participated in this meeting? Who is the host country? Or who was the host? What was discussed? Who was absent at this meeting? These kinds of questions come up all the time. And it's not exactly stated in the story. It is not explicitly there. You have to infer it from the meaning of the language. Most of us don't have any problem inferring those relationships, but systems do, right? So there are a number of emerging methods. And here is a who does what to whom relational entity extraction problem. And so this is very useful if you're going from unstructured data to semi-structured data, like in a database sense. If you wanted to organize the information into a table, then you need certain tools of going from unstructured information to structured information, or semi-structured information. So those give you a kind of 2 or 3 topics that we're working on at CMU, named entity extraction, novelty detection, first story detection, and maximal relevance, marginal relevance. And the next topic is the right people. Again, the right people is a very complicated phrase to define. You know, if a 7-year-old is working on a school project and he or she searches for heart care or heart attack or whatever, then the kind of stories you might want to retrieve for this person would be very different than if you're a doctor and asking the same question. So each person, based on their context and situation and so on, needs to be provided with a very different set of information. You know, once you see the example, it's obvious. But the issue of how the system or individuals, even its people, how would they know what the right information is? And most of us have the benefit of knowing this person is a doctor and that person is a kid, and therefore you might be able to provide the right information, but it's not always obvious, right? And then there's a whole set of other affiliations that also, kind of force you to select or sub-select information in a particular way. If you're a family group or an organizational group or stockholder group or whatever, then the information that you'd be looking for and you might be provided would be very different from each other. So the right people, right information to the right people. And so the basic tool that seems to be needed here is to somehow, given a text, classifying it, categorizing it, and saying, what is this about, and how does it group together? Is it for a kid, potentially, or is it for an expert, and in between? So there may be many different ways you would organize this information. And those ways of organizing the information is not in the content. You can't search for it. It's inferred information. Okay? And that's where the complexity comes in. So categorization, Yahoo for a long time in the beginning used to do manual assignment of categories, right? And Reuters, for example, used for a long time hand-coded rules. And a lot of the rest of us use various machine learning techniques, and they're getting more and more sophisticated as we go on, and seem to be. And then the issue of whether you can do hierarchical event classification becomes an interesting issue. So the right time frame. I used to think right time frame is as soon as you know the information, send it to me. That turns out to be the wrong strategy. I only want the information when I want it, just-in-time information. If you send it, well in advance, it'll sit there and I'll even lose it, right? That's the trouble with our education today. You go to college and you're taught calculus because 30 years later you might need it, By that time you've forgotten it, right? So you have to go back and relearn it. So if I have to relearn it, why don't you just teach me calculus in 1 week instead of 1 year? And then say, if and when you need it, go to Wikipedia or something and you'll learn the rest, right? Or, here is a learning by doing method of learning calculus. And you can learn it when you need it, right? So that's the kind of just-in-time, right, information being provided well in advance of when you might need it. But this is not just, that type of thing. All of us get information about a seminar or about something I'm supposed to do 2-3 weeks in advance. If you're like me, which you probably are, you're probably being bombarded with hundreds of emails every day, and you just cannot keep up with it. My senior colleague and the only Nobel Prize winner in our field, Herb Simon, the late Herb Simon, used to say, we have the wealth of information, but scarcity of human attention. We don't have enough lifetimes. Human beings don't follow Moore's law, right? Our capacity has been constant for the last thousands of years, and it's not going to change soon enough, anytime soon, purely by evolutionary means, right? So the right time frame is defining it even becomes a very difficult issue. So getting the information to the user exactly when it's needed, immediately when it's requested, prepositioned, this whole issue of anticipatory information. So for example, when you ask, one of the in areas of research, we have, some faculty members have studied at CMU, is what is called anticipatory computing. We cache results all the time, right? Computers were designed going back to the 60s, the Stretch, for example, would pre-compute lots of things and then pick one of the right ones. And that type of caching of the results is common in computer science. So the issue is, if I know there are only 40 things I can do and 38 of them are trivial and can be done instantaneously, 2 of them require search or something which may take, a minute of time, and I don't want you to wait a minute. You could pre-compute it, right? But you don't present it. You pre-compute it and you keep it. And when I ask for it, you then give it to me, right? So that's the issue here. So things like push technologies, alerts and reminders and breaking news, are also often considered harmful. Just because the Steelers won the Super Bowl, I don't need to know it the instant the certain event has happened in the Super Bowl. I may be in the middle of a meeting. I don't want that alert at that point. And if and when I'm ready to get it, I should be able to see it. So there's a whole set of things that alerts are not always the right things to do, becomes an important part of the right information. The right language, there are lots of, at CMU and many other places, including Google, there's a lot of language translation tools and techniques. And unfortunately, all of them tend to be, not that good. And it's a hard problem. It's been a hard problem. It will continue to be a hard problem. But there's a lot that is known about how to deal with it. And one of the reasons you might want to do the translation is for multilingual search. There, it doesn't matter if the translation is not perfect, because you're not asking the people to read the translation. It's mainly being used as a way of indexing into various materials, such as translingual research, language identification. Full language identification turns out to be a very interesting problem. One of the things we're working on is this million-book digital library project, right? That was well before Google Print, going back to 5 years ago. But we are using, China and India are partners with US in this project, and they are doing the scanning, and they enter all the metadata. And the scanning is done by high school graduates at not minimum wage, at some wage that I don't know about, because the government of China and India are paying for it. And I was looking at one book. It was obviously French, the title, but the guy didn't know that and typed it in as German. I said, "How could you be so stupid? How could you make such a mistake?" So this young man was obviously super bright, who should be hired by Google, came to me and brought a couple of books. And one of them was in Gujarati and another one was in Marathi. It so happens, even though I'm from India, I don't know either of those languages. I couldn't tell the difference between the two. So you're a PhD, you should know this, right? Sometimes I said, sorry, you're right. So it turns out just because you're educated or literate doesn't mean you know all the languages and you know all the scripts. But it's a very simple problem. All that you have to see is one or two words of the title, and then you can tell most of the time what language it is. So it is a sparse language machine learning problem. Most people that do language detection go look at a whole page of text and then do a frequency count and then say, oh, this is this language. That's an easy problem. The hard problem is, supposing I only give you 3 words of the title, can you tell what language it is? Turns out you can. It requires a little bit more work. But so there's an issue of regular translation, like the one that you can get from Google. And there's also what we call reading assistant or on-demand translation. Let us say you know a little bit of Italian, but not a lot. And you're starting to read, but you come up against, in an email, some word or phrase that you don't understand. You should be able to just select it and get immediately a translation, but that's much better than simple translation because now it's in context. So most of us have this problem, especially if you're non-native English-speaking speaker, and you come across a word or a phrase, or even if you're an English-speaking native speaker, if you're reading Shakespeare, and there are lots of phrases there that are not used by us today, and you need to be able to kind of have a translation assistant or reading assistant, which will give you that. It's an interesting sub-problem to solve and can be solved for all the different languages. Transliteration turns out to be an important problem in the right language because every language, many languages have different scripts. So it's very interesting, especially coming from India. It turns out in India, the sounds of all these languages, the sounds are the same, no matter what language, but the letters are different. But in Europe, the letters are the same, but they sound different. So when Unicode was invented, by the people in Xerox PARC, they thought all the word, all you have to do is make sure that if it's the same letter, no matter in what language it is, you have the same 8-bit code or whatever out of the 16 bits. But that turned out to be exactly the wrong thing for Indian languages. You want to be able to say, no matter what language it sounds, it is ka or ki or whatever the word syllable happens to be. And that's not easily identifiable in the Unicode system as it's currently done, right? Okay, so there's lots of issues on right language. There are many different techniques that have been tried: statistical translation, knowledge-based translation, example-based translation. I'm not going to give you a tutorial on all of these, and you can quickly find out about them. Where things are going now is the so-called multi-engine machine translation. It turns out no one of these techniques is perfect. They work some of the time, they don't work other times. So rather than depending on the best technique using on one, you say, can you actually build a hybrid system that gets translations from all of them and then figure out how to use it, right? So that's the multi-engine machine translation. And here is an example of different kinds of translation, EBMT and semantic, syntactic, interlingua, and so on. So here is an EBMT example, example-based machine translation, and multi-engine translation. I won't kind of go through all of this. Here is you get 3 different translations, and it turns out you need to figure out a way of selecting the right ones. That itself turns out to be a hard problem. How do you know this is the right set of things, right? And that is designed, that is determined by looking at the naturalness of the sentences. There are ways, if you ever worked on natural language generation as opposed to analysis, this is one of the issues that you spend time on. Okay. what we can do in new languages, what we cannot do yet, okay, is an important set of things. At CMU, we work on what we call orphan languages, obscure languages that Google may not be interested in, or most people, commercial organizations would not be interested in. The reason we work on these is we get funded by DARPA. DARPA wants to know how to translate push-to into English, or Swahili or some other language, and that's not something that you would normally consider as a research topic. Okay, the next interesting aspect of Bill of Rights is the right level of detail. And there are a number of aspects of level of detail, and I'll present some of them here. One of them is this issue of, if you have a document, if I have a report that came up on a Google search, I want to read it, I don't have the time to go through 300 pages. If there was an automatic summarization technology that will produce a summary for me, that would be very useful. And there are such tools and techniques. They're not good, but they're okay. But, and people stop at that point, is really not adequate. What you need is a hierarchical summarization. You need a one-line statement, a headline saying, what is this book about? And you need a paragraph, an abstract or something, and then executive summary and a regular summary. And so you can have 4 or 5 levels of detail of the same document. And one way we kind of characterize it is we say 10-word summary, 100-word summary, 1,000-word summary, a 10,000-word summary, right? And so information structuring, here it's not 10 words, it's 20, I guess. Headline, abstract, summary, and document. And the scope of the summary can also be different in different places. You can kind of see what the issues are. And this 2x2 matrix is a very illustrative of the kind of problems that you run into. One of them is when you just go do a generic query like you do onto Google, right? And if you're asking the question, do I want to read any further? What you want is a short abstract in the right column, query free. And if I want a summary where I don't have the time to read a 100-page book or 300-page book, give me a summary of 10 pages or 20 pages. Then those are the executive summaries. But neither of them are appropriate if you're actually looking for a highly focused response to a question where you say, you want to filter the search engine results by clustering them or grouping them to determine whether you want to read any further at all. And the query relevant summarization for busy people is, I don't want to read this article, I want an answer. And it turns out, I used to think this was only important for busy people. It's also relevant to an illiterate person in a village. So if this person goes to a computer or pays somebody to do a search for him and says, I have AIDS, what do I do? What they don't want is 10,000 or 100,000 links to AIDS-related articles. They are not competent to read and summarize and analyze and integrate the information that is there. They're illiterate or semi-literate. So what you want is something that will actually understand that knowledge and say, oh, you have AIDS, you need this cocktail. And then you say, where do I get it? And you get another answer. So it turns out the kinds of information that's needed when your query with highly focused requirement is essentially you want the computer to solve the problem. And so some of the types of work that Ask Jeeves and others tried to do earlier is related to this. And I think Google Answers might be related to it. For whatever reason, Google Answers has never taken off, at least I haven't seen a lot of buzz about it, but probably people use it still. So there maybe if we remove the cost angle, it'll be more successful. But solving problems is different than just providing information. One of this is passive knowledge, and the other one is active knowledge, right? So, in the right medium, finding information and providing information in non-textual media turns out to be very important also, and there are a number of issues, research issues in these areas that many of us are working on. I'm sure there may be work here too, but so in conclusion, the purpose of this presentation was to kind of highlight the kind of research problems and concerns some of us in academia are kind of grappling with. No doubt there are people at Google Research and Google Engineering that are also working on these problems. And the issue is how do we make substantial progress? And the only way that will happen, I think, is for us to begin to have kind of professional conferences in each of these topics, maybe organized by Google, a 1-day or 2-day or 3-day symposia that will actually bring all the people working in this thing in a public disclosure without having to sign an NDA or something, where you can actually present the ideas and kind of go forward. And that's one of the things I think we need, especially in areas where things are still very fuzzy of what the right way of approaching the problems are. Thank you. Okay. Any questions, comments? Otherwise, we can go have coffee. Yeah.
I had a question about, you were talking about trying to get some diversity of results, sampling one from the main cluster and then from the surrounding.
Right. Maximum marginal relevance.
But if you do that without having some good summarization capability, then people lose the idea that most people are talking about this thing in the middle, and all the fringe concepts are in the same way as the majority concepts. Right. They need some way to balance them.
So yeah, the way to look at it is grouping together relevant subtopics into clusters doesn't imply you have to throw away the detail. You might all be there. But it's like Google News does, right? It gives one headline and one maybe the main story, and then it says 74 other stories, right? And so if somebody wants to see how the same story was reported in multiple different locations, you can get it, right? But the interesting thing is, in that scenario, we never have the patience or time to go read all the 74 stories. What I would like to see is those 3 stories that provide completely different perspectives of the same story. You take any of these stories when there's controversies in Israel or Palestinian newspapers, the same story will have very different way of presentation. And that's not just there, it can be between here and Mexico, or it can be any place where there is differences of opinion between Google and Microsoft. The same story would be reported slightly differently in different. And what I want to see is those specific differences. In what way are they different? Because I don't have the time to read, hundreds of pages to figure out for me what the differences are. If I had a human assistant, I would say, you go figure it out and tell me what the differences are. And what we're looking for is the equivalent of that, right? So. Okay.